I just want to come back to the importance of, grounding and integration. We can really explore these vast territories, go far, but, how do we also come back to the here and now while we're here and really appreciate and soak it up so that you can create a ripple in this dream that we're all living in and hopefully for the better. And how do we also just really be there for folks too? How do we bring more compassion into the world? Because, yeah, there's a lot of craziness happening right now. And how do we come back and find our center in the midst of all this chaos?
When it comes to your inner journey of healing, personal development, and growth, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and live with clarity, connection, and wholeness, then you're in the right place. Welcome back to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a breathwork facilitator and integration coach, my goal with the show is to inspire you to take action for yourself. Whether you're taking the first step on your journey of healing and self-discovery, or you're already a seasoned traveler. The truth is, you have the capacity to transform and bring your intentions and dreams into the world. There's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to change your life with guided practices and interviews with practitioners doing the work. I want you to feel confident and inspired to take the next step on your own pathway to integration and wholeness, because the answer is found in the action. That's the vital point. So take a deep breath and let's drop in. You all know that I love returning guests on the show, and today was a really special one. He is Kyle Buller, the co-founder of Psychedelics Today, a leading psychedelic media and education company. He also co-founded the Vital training program, which is really great if you are looking to deepen your own integration and psychedelic work, or looking to become a facilitator or taking some sort of work in the psychedelic space. At 16, Kyle had a near-death snowboarding accident, and that led him to pursue a BA in transpersonal psychology and a MS in clinical mental health counseling with a focus on somatic psychology. He specializes in psychedelic integration, spiritual emergence, and breathwork, all of which we talked about in our amazing interview today. And he's also a breathwork facilitator and studied with dream shadow transpersonal breathwork and has been facilitating that for many, many years. So just seems like a good person to have on the podcast, right? I know you're thinking that. And it was really amazing. I went back and listened to our first episode this morning, and it was a whole 15 minutes from my humble roots in episode 5 to almost an hour and a half that we went today. So I really hope that you enjoy this podcast. Kyle starts us off with a really great meditation that you can come back to when you need it. And I think there's a lot of wisdom and great conversation here around the topics of spiritual emergence and what that means, both from the Groffian perspective and also just our own experiences together, as well as psychedelic integration, what that means to stay grounded, what that means to go through your own journey and your own work of discovery and exploration, as well as getting into a little bit of breath work and how that can be helpful, which was the first question that we talked about a few years ago. The one question that we asked on One Question Wednesday was, why is breathwork so good for psychedelic integration? So I'm glad that we were able to come full circle and talk a little bit about that as well. And now please enjoy this amazing conversation with Kyle Buller. Kyle Buller, welcome back to the Vital Point podcast, is what we've been calling it for quite some time now. I think before it was One Question Wednesday, which was quite a while ago.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, and I didn't remember it was just one question when you remind me it was only a 15-minute episode. I was like, oh, wow. It must have been a while ago.
It was December of 2021.
Oh, whoa. Yeah, it was. It was a long time ago. We were
Yeah,
still.
and it was on IG Live, and It's just figuring things out, and now I have like, half an idea of what to do. So it's, slowly but surely we're making it happen.
It evolves over time. Yeah.
It does. How's your podcast evolved over time? Do you get that same sort of feeling listening back to older episodes?
Definitely, yeah, and I've kind of pulled back a tiny bit from doing a lot of podcasts, just because my schedule, I've been more focused on our education, but, yeah, just thinking about, like, how we started, where we started, and how it's really evolved over the years. Yeah, sometimes I go back and, like, listen to, like, old episodes and cringe. I'm like, "Ugh."
Totally. Can definitely be cringy.
Yeah, yeah.
And eh, I'm so excited to have you back on because it well, listening back to that older episode this morning put me back into that older kind of place. Like it was
Mm,
helping me remember where I was, even in the midst of this cringiness and not really knowing what I was doing, but where my head was at and what I was working on, and remembering why I wanted to talk to you back then, and then coming full circle of like, oh yeah, I want to talk to Kyle again, and so many things that I was getting interested in back at the end of 2021 that have come to fruition and are coming to fruition. And, I just want to say that I really admire what you're doing and the work that you do, and just kind of the way that you've built your company and show up in the world. And
thank
I
you.
think first and foremost, that's one of the reasons that I was excited to chat with you again is, um, this idea that when you see people in your world that are doing things that are exciting or that you want to do, it's a reason to celebrate them and also to see that it's possible for you as
Mhm.
well.
Totally, right? Like, for those that maybe don't know who I am or whatnot, yeah, I'm a co-founder of Psychedelics Today, which is a psychedelic media and education company. And we started just as a little passion project, probably just like you, starting off wanting to chat with folks, right? And and I think we're at 9 years coming up in May. We started back in like 2016, and it was just a little passion project. I was in grad school. I met my the other co-founder Joe Moore through our Breathwork community, and really didn't think that it would be where it's at today. And I think if you're really dedicated to your craft and your passion, you can build something, right? You can grow it and turn it into something really unique. And I never expected I would be here, to be honest. Just a little passion project that just kind of kept growing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you are here. And would you be willing to sort of officially open the episode with a little practice to help the audience get settled and drop in with us?
Yeah, sure. When you sent me the form, I was thinking about this meditation we were doing within our program. So I'm going to start there. And it's really about kind of tapping into our different levels of like awareness and processing. So, yeah, if you're listening, if you're in a safe place, you can just find that comfortable position, whether you're sitting down or laying. And if it feels safe to do so, you can close your eyes if that feels comfortable, or leave your eyes open. And as we're grounding in, just inviting you to start with 3 deep breaths. So, a nice big deep inhale through your nose, bringing the breath all the way into the belly, holding. Slow, long exhale through your mouth. And just taking a moment to pause. Notice that emptiness, that stillness before your next inhale. And then when you feel ready, another big deep breath in through the nose, all the way down, holding. Slow, long exhale. And one more big deep breath in, all the way into the belly, holding. Slow, long exhale through the mouth. And just inviting you to think about, maybe a question you may have been having. Um, Maybe it's been something that's been on your mind, maybe something you're confused about, stumped about. Could be an insight that maybe you've had during a journey that you're trying to get clarity on. And just bringing that thought, question, whatever that is, to the forefront of your mind and really feel what it feels like for that to be in the mind. What feeling do you have in your head? What does the mind have to say about this thing? And if the mind could give you an answer for that question, what would it be? Next, inviting you to place your hand, if that feels comfortable, over your heart, your chest, and then just taking a nice big deep breath into the heart space, creating more space in there. And inviting you to bring that question, that thought, that curiosity down into the heart. What does the heart have to say about that? How does the heart feel about that? And is it different than what the mind was saying or how the mind was feeling about it? And then just inviting you to think about the heart and mind connection. How do those two communicate? And just taking a moment to track any somatic feelings that are coming up, noticing what's coming up in the body or around that heart space or in the mind. And next, inviting you to place your hand on the belly, maybe below the belly button. Just inviting you to take a nice big deep breath into that space to bring your awareness down there. So when you feel ready, nice big deep inhale, exhaling. And so taking a moment to bring that question, curiosity, insight down into the gut. This is our seat of intuition. And just noticing what the gut has to say about that thing that you're thinking about. How does the gut feel about that? And is it different than the heart or the mind? And then just taking a moment to think about how all three of those centers communicate and what feels most true and alive for you. And then we'll slowly start to come back to this space, and we'll just end again with 3 deep breaths. And this time, if you're in the place to place your feet on the ground, just feeling that groundedness, the connection with your feet on the floor, noticing any temperatures or textures. And just inviting you to take a nice big deep breath, bringing that breath all throughout the entire body, all the way into the soles of your feet, holding, and then slow, long exhale through the mouth. And also just visualizing any energy that feels like it needs to be released to pass down through the torso, the legs, through the feet, into the ground, into the earth. And then when you feel ready, another big deep breath in, all the way down, holding in the feet, exhaling. And if you want to make a sound or a sigh, you can feel free to do so. And then one last big deep breath in, all the way down, holding, exhaling. And just slowly inviting some movement back in, maybe some stretching, and slowly returning to this space.
Thank you for that. Before we hit record, I was saying that was feeling cold or like shivery, and I wasn't sure how much of it was from not having a jacket on and it being a little colder today in Tucson. And some of it I was sensing was a little somatic, like just some excitement to talk to you. And one thing about doing a practice like that is it definitely tells you, like, yeah, I put on a jacket, but also noticed how
Mm,
things were able to settle in the body,
yeah, and I
which
guess I guess like what did you notice in like those different channels from like the mind, heart, and gut?
yeah, I brought up a question that I worked on with my somatic therapist yesterday around slowing down
Mm,
and sort of this dual experience of knowing that I need to slow down from a certain perspective, but also enjoying the excitement of sort of working too much or having too
yeah.
much to do. Like I related it to the somatic feeling of when I'm driving too fast. And
Mm,
I know that I'm driving too fast, but I kind of like it, even though it's a
right.
little bit dangerous. And she had asked me, well, what would it be like to just focus on one thing? And I said, wow, that feels impossible. Because even within one main project, and I'm sure you can relate to this with what you're doing, there's so many like sub projects and
Hmm.
moving parts that make up that bigger thing that you're doing. And the place that we came to, and I felt like it was way less in my mind today and much more in the heart, was letting God or the universe or however you want to express that kind of work through my work
Mm,
and kind of infusing that into what I'm doing. So it felt pretty integrated today as opposed to like, I'm really kind of grinding this out, trying to figure it out in the mind.
yeah.
So it was more of a, I think, the anchoring and kind of integrative experience for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I can spin out when it just hangs out in the mind so much, right? It's like the analytical part comes on, and um, I think when I was thinking about this in the week that we were doing this meditation, it was really about discernment and
Mm.
how do we discern information when we get exposed to it, and plant medicine journey, psychedelics, and breath work, because we can get really big insights, and sometimes we're just not somatically attuned, right? And we tend to live in the mind, and so
Yeah.
it gets very analytical and logic comes in versus, being able to drop into the heart and the gut and just learn and feel into, what these different channels are telling us.
Yeah. I think I also have the advantage, or I don't know if I'd call it an advantage all the time, of just coming out of the um, first of two advanced modules for my last year of somatic experiencing. And a lot of the focus in that training was about yeah, like you've been titrating and you've been taking it slower and really
Mm,
trying to track things during the first couple of years. Now you got to really expand that container
yeah,
because this is how you're going to heal trauma. Like the instructor was sort of joking about it and saying like when somebody comes to you, they just want to be able to get on the plane next week without having a panic attack.
right.
They don't have months to learn how to track sensation and, get in
Yeah.
touch with what's going on in their body. So how are you going to work with that? So yeah, I think just feeling okay with like making it bigger and feeling a
Mm,
little bit more uncomfortable
yeah.
instead of like, oh, I got to really resource myself towards feeling grounded and, you know, okay.
Well, you bring up a good point, I think, about like healing and trauma and somatics. It's like, when do we hit the gas and when do we hit the brake? And
Right.
I think a lot of the narrative sometimes is centered around the brake and titration and safety. But I think also from that like somatic perspective, it's important to, develop resiliency in the system. And the only way that we do that is pushing that edge, right? Because otherwise, if we're just staying in safety all the time, we're actually not getting exposed to that new thing that's going to cause us to actually grow. So yeah, I can definitely feel that. There's sometimes I really want to, play it slow, play it safe. I don't want to bring anything else on. And there's other times where I'm really thankful I got kind of pushed into the abyss, because those have been like the biggest growing points where I'm like, oh, whoa, okay.
Exactly. Yeah, that and developing that discernment, like you're saying, of what does my body need? What does my heart need? What's
Yeah,
my maybe sometimes not listening to what my mind thinks it needs.
yeah,
But yeah, just finding that balance, like you're saying.
yeah, yeah.
I think that leads into something that I was really curious to talk to you about, and just to maybe provide some context. Uh, my partner that I know that that's actually the first time I met you, is you came and talked to the Tucson psychedelic
Oh yeah.
practitioners group, which is really cool because of her. But we were talking about work and specifically my work as an integration coach. And she had this really interesting comment that was basically like, well, you're marketing yourself as an integration coach, but what does that mean? You got to be more specific than that. And although there was this little bit of knee jerk kind of egoic wounding when she said that, when I paused and thought about it, it was actually a really good question. And the answer that came up for me was that I'm really enjoying supporting people in their spiritual discovery and evolution, and even dared to use the word spiritual emergence, which I know is something that's part of your work. And so I'd really like to dive into this idea of what spiritual emergence is, and what it means to you, and how you're supporting clients with that.
Yeah, thank you. So spiritual emergence, it was a term that was coined by Stan and Christina Groff, and it was a bit of a play on words to describe this psycho-spiritual crisis that could have been induced by psychedelics, by breathwork, by yoga, by any sort of life like incident, like car accidents, birth. There's so many of those like stressors that really can push us over the edge at times, either in bad ways or good ways, right? Even the good can bring up a lot of content. But it's also this like, yeah, this play on words where it's describing the psycho-spiritual crisis, but this opportunity to emerge. And as we come through that and we emerge out on the other side, Groff talks about like, maybe this higher level of functioning, higher level of consciousness. Maybe people tune into different skills, maybe being more empathetic towards folks, and you can get into the other side of like, feeling into energies and stuff like that. Not all the time, but it's a possibility for folks. Um, Maybe developing more self-awareness. And so sometimes the term spiritual emergence and emergency are kind of used together. And but the distinction would be a spiritual emergence is like this psycho-spiritual crisis that's unfolding, but you're able to kind of continue, your daily, things in your life. You're able to go to work, keep your relationships, it's not so overwhelming where that's disrupting it. Whereas a spiritual emergency is really disrupting that, to the point where maybe you do need to get, traditional mental health services. You might need to find a place where you can have respite. Maybe you can't go to a job. Relationships kind of start falling apart, and it's really overtaking you, in a way. And so, um, yeah, so that kind of describes like what that spiritual emergence process is. Sometimes when we talk about this, the question is this spiritual emergence or psychosis? So when we're talking about, maybe from a traditional mental health perspective, a lot of the symptoms and experiences that arise in people that are going through these crises can look a lot like psychosis, right? Like I'm hearing voices, I'm having visions, all of a sudden there might be a lot of grandiose thinking, of like, all of a sudden I'm Jesus, right? I'm Messiah, and I can, heal everybody and stuff like that. And so it is a fine line and a fine distinction of like how we're classifying and supporting folks through this process. Um, on the client end, I haven't been supporting too many people through this, in the past few years, just because my work has taken me in a different direction. But when I worked at a place, back in 2015 for folks experiencing early episode psychosis. And while we necessarily didn't use that term spiritual emergence and emergency, I came in with a pretty heavy kind of Groffian spiritual emergence framework, and that's how I viewed it. And then I would also support people, through coaching and therapy, later on that needed support through that. So a lot of remote work, some in-person work for folks that really needed that extra support, and some of it was a lot through psychoeducation, especially on like the coaching side of things. People just wanting to learn like what the hell's going on with me, right? And providing that safe space for them to explore their experience, because these types of experiences can be really scary. Our reality starts to kind of crumble. There's a term that I think comes more from the philosophical realm, but been hearing a little bit more in the psychedelic world, is this ontological shock. What happens when we have such a big, powerful experience that it really shakes our belief system to the core, and it has us questioning everything that we believed in. And that can be, yeah, really disrupting for folks and really scary. So just being able to provide the container for them to explore what's going on, get support, and get a little psychoeducation as well.
Yeah, I would say Groff's view of mental health and the world is anything but traditional.
Hmm.
And that was one of my big takeaways from going through that module last year in the Groff transpersonal training was just approaching things from the perspective that it's almost never psychosis. And that as long as the client has the ability to be reflective and examine and get curious about what they're going through, that there's so much that can be treated as spiritual emergence, even things like, schizophrenia in some cases. But at the same time, they were showing us videos of people that, you know, were in mental health facilities, and they had someone that was acting curious and supporting them and saying, I do believe that you can get through this. And yet the doctor was saying, well, I worked with this person, 6 days a week for like 3 years. So, definitely it can be a lot of, a lot of work there, and a lot more
Yeah.
work than most people are able or willing to go through in some of those really extreme cases.
And in some of those cases, you really need like round the clock support. So the place that I worked at, it was a residential home where people could come and live there for 3 to 6 months, and get peer support. And so they had support round the clock, right? And the problem is we don't really have a lot of those facilities. And
Right.
so people going through these experiences have a really hard time trying to find that respite, because it's also a lot of resources on the friends and family, right? And there were times where we did see, I would say, sometimes pretty extreme cases, and being in that, safe environment to explore. And our whole ethos was to really be with people, not necessarily trying to suppress their experience, change it, tell them what they were experiencing, but really just be there with them, and support the process as it was unfolding. And watching people come out on the other side, and then, I would say there were those folks that actually, they might have been going through what we could classify as a spiritual emergence, but actually realizing like maybe they actually needed a higher level of care at times. And that was really challenging for me to accept, of going like, actually, this person might be better off in the psychiatric unit for this moment in time, just because of the way, the protocols and the structures were in place. It's like, are we actually sometimes doing a little bit more harm than good, for example, when somebody's catatonic for days and actually needs possible medication, they're not eating and showering and stuff like that. It's like, then you have to really do risk assessment there, and make sure that, they're being taken care of.
Mm, yeah, for sure. I think maybe setting those folks aside and acknowledging that there are people that definitely need a higher level of care, and that there are times where medication or, more intense hospitalization is the healthiest thing for them. I want to go back to what you were saying about the importance of being understood and listened to, and also just acknowledging that what a person's going through can be really scary and really
Hmm.
overwhelming. There's been times for myself where, and just again for context, like I work part time at a residential treatment center for behavioral health. And so there are folks that, have opened up to me in their treatment about things that if they were saying it, for instance, in a breathwork retreat or at the end of a medicine retreat or an integration circle, they'd probably feel a lot more accepted.
Hmm.
Things like
Yeah.
synchronicities, or like you said, hearing voices, or having visions. And there's been times where I've gently said, as I'm listening and as I'm coming into it, like you're saying, with a very open mind of like, well, how can I just be here with this person and listen to their experience? Just caution them of, I hear you and this sounds amazing. And maybe just be careful of like who you're telling this to,
Yep.
especially when you're in this
Hmm.
environment,
Yep.
because the possibility for pathology is real,
Hmm.
especially
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
So really interesting kind of reflection on set and setting, you know?
Know your audience, yeah, because sometimes that can, spiral out in another way. And as you were saying, like, it might be accepted in like a psychedelic circle. I remember one person in particular, sometimes they would close their eyes and just go somewhere. I remember asked, like, what's going on for you right now? And they were saying, I'm time traveling, and I'm trying to go back into the past to heal the future. And my immediate thought was like, hmm, that's not too different than what people report in psychedelic use, right? When we're talking about like healing old wounds and traumas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, you're just doing it naturally without like, needing the substance there.
There's I mean, I feel like every breathwork training that I've done, at least with Groff transpersonal training, there's a little warning that comes at the end of the retreat, which is, be careful who you talk to about
Yeah.
this.
Yep.
Make sure that the if you're sharing this with someone, you really trust them and that they're going to be supportive, because sharing such a heartfelt, vulnerable experience and then not having that support that you're hoping for can be really disintegrating.
Hmm.
And what's the saying? The madman and the mystic are swimming in the same
Same river.
waters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe like the shame that comes around with that too, right? Like you're
Mm.
so open and vulnerable and you share something that's like so personal, and somebody says, "Ah, that was just a vision. You had a psychedelic experience," or like, breath work, that's not real, right? When personally people are deeply impacted by these experiences. And so, yeah, it is really important to know your audience and know like how to talk about this stuff. And I always kind of made a little analogy of like, if you really want to share it with somebody, maybe like do a little fishing, right? Like toss it in, feel if there's some bites,
Right.
And just kind of gauge. Don't give them all the information. Just say little things, and if there's curiosity and openness there, maybe let that bait sit a little bit longer. But if you feel something it's like off, maybe it's a sign to not fully disclose everything.
Blue Magic Alchemy on School is still growing, still thriving, and would love for you to come check us out. There are recorded and live breathwork and meditation practices, workshops, as well as a community of alchemists, practitioners who are there to support you in your growth, as well as support each other as a community. Right now, we're filming every day mindfulness meditations for the Path of Meditation course. We'd love to have you join us there at www.school.com/Blue Magic Alchemy. They talked a lot in the training about, or at least this is the way that I processed it, as the sort of a Venn diagram with these two circles that can get increasingly more overlapped the more work in expanded states of consciousness that you're doing. On the one hand is the holotropic, as Groff would have put it, world and reality where time is linear and you can't be in more than one place at one time, and gods and archetypal energies don't appear to you, and you pay taxes and go to work and get groceries and all the things that we do to be in the world. And then the other is the holotropic reality where throw out everything that you know about reality. Time is all times at once, and you can time travel to the past to save the future, and you might meet all these different energetic beings or deities, and things are a lot stranger, to say the least. And that the more work that we're doing in these realms, the more that these two circles, which may be completely separate at the beginning, start to overlap with each other. And
Yeah.
that's the real need for the integration work in general, but also what can create this spiritual emergency when those circles start to become almost one, and we
Yeah.
can't discern like what reality we're living in at any one time.
Yeah, and that is the work, right? And my teacher Lenny talks about that distinction between the hylo and holotropic. And hylo, I think the Greek pronunciation that comes from that is like huli, and that's raw lumber. So it's really talking about the mechanistic Newtonian Cartesian paradigm that we really live in, right? And so what happens when we go into these expanded states, we're entering more into this holotropic transpersonal realm. And it really, I think, shakes up our understanding of reality, right? Because we live in this 3D world, right? And we don't have necessarily a worldview that can like encompass everything in the holotropic realm too, and that's really confusing to folks, right? Because even though a lot of us, we might still journey and we might still have these big experiences, we still live in like this Newtonian Cartesian paradigm where time, mechanistic action is very, I mean, just to sit here in front of this computer, right? Like
Right.
it's a blessing that like we can understand how to put all this together, and we're confronting it every day, right? And working with it. But on the other hand, there is this kind of like other realm and other possibilities that we can tap into, and it's sometimes jarring to come back, right, and be like, oh my god, like I got all this stuff, I got technology in front of me and this and that, and yeah, it can be really really jarring for folks.
Yeah, like you said, that's the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to going back to work after, like a weekend retreat, which by the way, I would not recommend doing. But, being in like a staff meeting and someone saying,
Yeah.
"So what'd you do this weekend? Anything fun?" And I'm sitting there going, I have no idea how to answer that in a way that wouldn't get me immediately fired,
Yeah.
if not,
Yeah.
institutionalized right now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
again, knowing your audience and how to talk about that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. If somebody is having what they would consider a spiritual emergence, what would be one thing that you might suggest to them as a way to start working with it?
I think it really depends on the severity of things, right? You know, my initial response is let's not try to make sense of this right away. Like, how do we really get grounded and take care of the things that are in front of us? Because I think initially we want to jump into meaning making. What's going on? How do I navigate this? Um, and I think like what I've learned through experience is how do we ground ourselves, right? And how can we think about the meaning making process a little bit later? Because when you're so caught up in it, then the mind just starts to spin, and then it can create more anxiety, more panic. So I always come back to like, how do we just focus on the here and now? How can we focus on grounding, whether that's like developing some exercise, a good eating routine? A lot of people that go through this like have a lot of like energetics flowing through them, and like sometimes people feel just like really ungrounded. I remember working with somebody and they're like, my hands are buzzing nonstop, like I can't get the buzzing out of my hand, right? and so I always think like, how do we learn how to ground that energy first, where we can then be in a place to do some like self-reflective practices to then start to understand it, right? Because when I think about it from like a somatic perspective, a lot of people are already outside their window of tolerance right now when they're in that heightened, transpersonal state. So it's like, how do we, shrink that down until we can like develop the capacity to work with some of that stuff? And, I think this really came through when I worked with people experiencing early episode psychosis, where I wanted to just like intervene to do meaning making and transpersonal interventions, and just having a deep realization that they're just not there, right? And it's actually causing more stress for them. And so again, how do we come back and focus on the body? But there might be people that are, they're having this emergence phenomenon, and they really just need to talk to somebody. So maybe they are kind of more in a meaning making process. And so there's something I talk about when I teach integration, and since I'm in the education space, it's kind of like a little pun, but I ask like, what's your GPA? And so I think about the integration not as a linear fashion, but kind of like a circular kind of fashion, where the G is grounding, the P is processing, and the A is action. And so again, thinking about severity, if somebody is in a high level where they need to ground, that's where we want to focus on. We want to focus in that bubble. Maybe somebody's already done some grounding work and they're really in that meaning making process, and they're coming to you and saying, I had this spiritual emergence, or I'm in this emergence and I really need information, right? Then we can kind of get into the processing aspect of things. And then, we don't want to just sit in that processing. We want to also make some plans and make some action there. So how do we make that applicable and turn that into, behavioral changes, or whatever that is, insight into change? And so, I struggle with paralysis by analysis, too analytical. Sometimes I just get caught up in the processing. And so that's where that also came from too. It's like, how do we move that out of processing and into action? Because it's so easy, and sometimes we get crippled by these big visions or these big insights, and it is hard to break that down and actually do small actionable steps, because it's either fears holding us back, anxiety, or again, maybe it's like the vision is so big where you're just like, I have no idea even where to start, like this is just so overwhelming. So I'm also, you got to assess like where somebody's at, right? And kind of think about like the next steps. Like there was somebody that called a number of years ago, and they weren't taking care of their daily needs, like not eating much, and not leaving the house. And my immediate response was like, we need some local support for you, right? Like, do you have a psychiatrist around? Do you have like a therapist or social worker that is in your local community that can help you? I mean, there's only so much I can do from afar. So like helping them start to establish some of those relationships, so they can start to get more grounded and maybe get some care, right? As much as like maybe we don't want traditional care, sometimes that might be the best step forward to just get the ball rolling. So, maybe you do start eating again, and, are able to start to engage in this work.
Yeah, I love that. Order of operations is what I hear, right?
Yeah.
And even sort of taking that, after enlightenment, fold the laundry kind of
Ex-
idea even
yeah.
further. I'm reminded of I can't remember who it was, but hearing a story about someone going through a big, spiritual emergency, and they were they were like on a commune or a farm or something, and literally what helped them was, you know somebody gave them a bucket every day for a while and said, "Go pick blueberries," and they were just getting their hands in the dirt,
Yeah.
picking blueberries, just focusing on one thing, be grounding, being outside, because that's basically what they could handle at that moment. And then over
Yep.
time, starting to come back and getting more support as that GPA, as you put it, started to change.
Yeah, and when we think about like some of those spiritual traditions, right? Like so much was focused on the body because that is the vessel to contain the experience. And nowadays we live in a world where, I mean, these things are so accessible, right? And people are having experiences, but not necessarily like thinking about the vessel and the containment of those experiences within the vessel, right? So, like, maybe we think about like a culture that had rites of passages. It's not that you just like went into this thing, right? You had a cosmology, a shared cosmology. You had the building up to it, and then you went through that process, and then you had like this worldly return. So there was a lot of support in that process versus in our culture, we don't have much of that shared cosmology. People are accessing these states like on their own without maybe much support and grounding. And so we're actually, I don't think, sometimes doing the prep work. Whereas, yeah, if you looked in, say, other traditions, like yoga, for example, right? Like there's the 8 limbs, there's all sorts of different yoga, but also about strengthening the body, right? So we can actually hold that experience when it starts to get really big. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, I remember reading like a pranayama book, and they were talking about before you get into this, you should be doing like, you should have a really strong asana process, and experience with getting into your body and being present with it. And you're right. We're one of the only cultures, I think, throughout history that's really shunned or disavowed the value of expanded states of consciousness. And because of that, there is no structure. There are no guardrails. And sometimes people are getting mixed messages as far as what they grew up with.
Hmm.
Well, I grew up hearing that drugs were bad. And now you're telling me I can take certain drugs, but not other ones. And these ones
Right.
are criminalized in one state. And, you're getting thrown in jail in another state. It's a really, I would imagine, a very challenging environment to navigate in if you're not maybe as involved in it intimately as you and I are.
Right. And like think about like maybe like our cultural like drug of choice, which is alcohol, right? Yeah, it's such a different experience than, these other states. And yeah, it's crazy that that is the socially accepted substance and drug.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the things that are socially accepted are things that are taking us out of our natural window of tolerance.
Hmm.
Alcohol, caffeine, tobacco, things that are like basically encouraging us to override the wisdom of the body.
Hmm.
And then, to kind of circle back to what you were saying, is of so many people that are in sort of psychosis or spiritual emergence, just already being outside of that window of tolerance, right?
Yeah.
So it's like waking up and your house is on fire, and then you want to sit there and say, well, what happened? How did this fire start? Who did this? Instead of like order of operations, get the heck out of the house and figure out how to put the fire out.
Yeah, instead of fanning the flames or pouring more gasoline on it, like, and I think I did that when I was younger,
Yeah.
because I had this really traumatic snowboarding accident, almost died, and then that left me in ontological shock of like, who the hell am I? What am I doing here? And then compounding that with like psychedelics, and then that opening me up to all sorts of different worlds and realities. And then I'm just so open, so expanded, and feeling like I'm going crazy in different ways and not having that support, but then thinking the answer is to just keep doing more because then I'll figure it out. And realizing that's not what I needed. I actually needed to step away from that and actually get grounded and do some of the work. And once I applied for this transpersonal psychology program, that's when I started to really kind of do more grounding, because I'm like, okay, I'm having all these experiences. Now I need like a theoretical framework. I just need a community of people to be around to support me through this process. And that was so grounding for me, kind of getting back in the body, trying to get outside and do more exercise. But yeah, just, I feel like in those younger years, I was just, fanning the flames. I'm like, oh, if I just keep going in there, I'm going to figure it out, when really it was really destabilizing. And I wish I knew what I knew now, but that also was like an initiation, I think, that got me on this path. So um,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to share a little bit more, because the thing that comes up for me initially is just knowing what know about you and some of the things that you post on your social media is that you love winter sports.
mhm.
So the immediate thought that comes up to me from that sort of that therapeutic perspective is, wow, you must have done a lot of work to sort of decouple that accident and that experience that must have been super traumatic and difficult, and to be able to like be present and enjoy being in a similar environment now.
I don't it's so weird. Like I remember I had a friend that bought a snowboard that year and saw me in the hospital, and like I was all green, I had like blood transfusion. I think like I lost about 5.5 pints of blood internally. Doctor said if I came in like 5 or 10 minutes later, I would have been dead on arrival. So I was like really skirting that line between death. And I had a friend bought and sold a snowboard that year. As I was healing, that's all I could think about was getting back on my snowboard. And I remember the first day back, I said, okay, Kyle, take it slow. Like you just hurt yourself last year. There's no need to like get back into it as fast as like you're doing it. And as soon as that snowboard, my feet hit the ground, it was like, boom, I was back into it. But I will say there have been times where I found myself in like some pretty scary situations where I have questioned like, why do I keep getting back on this damn thing? It's pretty dangerous, but it's the embodiment, I think. It's the only time like I can really get out of my head, like that analytical part of my mind, and feel grounded and enter into a flow state, because you can't really think about anything else. Like if you start thinking about other things, then that's when like, accidents and stuff happen, because then you're not paying attention. Like, when I'm out there, I'm paying attention to every little micro movement, like my toes are doing and how my heels are going and like how the edge is engaging. And for me, that's my kind of integration. Like it's like bringing these experiences like down my body and being so focused on the here and now. And that is just like one sport that like allows me to do that. And the flow state too, right? Like when you get into a good flow, there's nothing like it in my mind, where it's just you're in the zone. You're not thinking about anything else. You're just in it, and you need to be so aware of the environment, how the environment's changing, how connected your feet are to the board and edges, because every little micro movement, every little thing that you're doing is playing a huge impact. So yeah, a lot of people thought like I was going to be really afraid getting back on my board the next year, and thought maybe it took me years to get back on it, but I saw it as a freak accident. And even though there's a lot of psychological turmoil that unfolded during that time of like, a lot of like an existential crisis, not knowing who I was, really struggling emotionally. I still saw it as a freak accident, and I felt like it was something that life was calling me forward into something else. And so, yeah, it didn't really scare me off. And I feel like I didn't do too much work to like get myself back in that environment. I just kind of was like, this is what I love to do, and I'm just going to get back on it.
That's amazing
Yeah.
and really inspiring to hear. And I'm happy to hear it for sure. Um, what was the other side of it like? I mean, you mentioned kind of going through like an existential crisis and then finding some maybe what you thought were answers, but more questions with exploring psychedelics.
Yeah, so like after the accident, I was riding a high. I was 16, I was a sophomore in high school. So, during those are formative years, right? You're trying to figure out who you are as a person, your identity starting to form, your social groups really impact a lot of that. And so I was really struggling. I kept thinking, like, why the hell am I still here? Like, I should be dead, Like, I don't know why I came back here. And so for a while, I rode this high of like, oh my God, I'm so grateful to be alive and this is amazing. And then the reality of the world sank in, like all the social structures that we put ourselves in. I became too aware of like the suffering in the world, and I just we're having all these thoughts. I'm like, why do humans create these structures and just bind to them so much, and we're just causing so much suffering? And why can't we like let go of that and think of a new way of living? And I think as a 16-year-old, that was a lot to hold. And I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have anybody to like really talk to about this stuff. So I felt really alone with it. And I thought I was like, the only one kind of experiencing this. And one of my favorite classes, I think, was junior year. And it was like English lit, and we were exploring all these existential writers. And I fell in love with that class, with like Camus and like all those other folks. And I went back and read some papers a couple years ago. I found these old papers that I wrote, and like they were depressing. But my English teacher loved it. Like she was like giving me all this wonderful feedback about it because I think she could see my existential crisis unfolding and how I was really relating to these authors that like, I got into this point where like everything's meaningless. Like, why do anything? Like, we can build all this stuff and do really great, and then the evil forces in the world are going to destroy it. We're all going to be dead anyways, so, like, who the fuck cares about anything? Like, so I was just like, somebody mentioned this in the class the other day, just lost in the sauce, like just completely engulfed by this type of thinking, very nihilistic. And I look back, and when I was reading some of that stuff, I really see a young kid really struggling with their who they are in the world, and like struggling with the nature of reality and the existence of humans and the social constructs that we've created. And so I was really struggling with a lot of suicidal ideation too. There was a big part of me that wanted to go home. So when I was dying, I heard this voice saying, "You're going home. You're going back to the stars where we all come from, and this physical life's going to cease to exist, but you'll continue onward. And this is just a transition. But the more that you struggle with this transition, the harder it's going to be. So if you can relax into it, the easier this transition will be for you." And so at that time, I became just overwhelmed with like love and bliss and excitement. And I remember just laying there in the CAT scan machine going, I'm going home. Like, this is what we've all been waiting for. And so to come back to a place where I considered for a while, I thought I was stuck in some sort of death bardo hellscape, where I'm like, where am I? Like, this feels like hell. Like, this world felt hellish to me. And so my thought pattern was just, I want to go back to that void. I want to go back to that home feeling. I don't want to deal with anything in front of me. Like, this shit sucks, you know? And then that's when I found psychedelics after high school. I think I was 19 when I had my first experience, 18 or 19, I forget. But I relived my near death experience in a really unique way, and it helped me to resolve a lot of that thinking, and it helped to provide some sense of answers that I think I was looking for, and gave me more meaning to life. My life completely shifted after this experience with psilocybin. I wanted to live again, like all those thoughts just kind of vanished. And I realized it wasn't that I physically wanted to die and leave this world. There was a part of me that was having a hard time reintegrating back into the world. And there was this kind of tension and push and pull between the old me that kept wanting to show up and then this new me that wanted to show up in a way. And so I think after that accident, I was really struggling with, yeah, who am I? There's this old Kyle, but then there's this new Kyle emerging, and it was almost like these parts really kind of fighting. And the one part was like, you just need to, quote unquote, die in a sense, right? And I think during that psilocybin experience, I realized that these parts could live together, and they don't necessarily need to die, and I don't need to be thinking that way. So they started to kind of merge together in that experience and really shifted my life in a pretty dramatic way and got me more curious. And I remember I came back from that kind of scratching my head going like, how the hell could somebody eat something that grows from the earth that could replicate death like that all over again? So I just became so intellectually curious and fascinated. How does consciousness work? What is all this like, and how could you ingest substances that could just radically, shift your consciousness into these mystical experiences? And so I took that, I think, a little too far at times, where I was really trying to push the edge. Like, how far could I go? Could I and I wasn't doing psychedelics all the time, but I think I was just very open to these expanded states, probably because my near death experience. So every time I would go in, I would go really far. And I think going that far really pushed the boundaries of my mind and reality. And so there was a point where everything was like kind of crumbling and falling apart. I had no idea what the hell was going on. I thought I was like living in a dream. I was really dealing with a lot of depersonalization, derealization. And I remember sitting there reading the Tibetan book of living and dying, and they're talking about like, nothing exists. It's all an illusion. I remember something inside me said, I can't read this stuff anymore. Like, I'm losing it right now. Like, I understand the premise of this philosophy, but like I'm living it right now and I can't function. So I had to put it down and step away from it and say, I think I need, other kind of influences here. And yeah, yeah. So it's a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
mean, as you started to share it, I was thinking, wow, this is like a parallel to the psychedelic integration experience, even before you were taking psychedelics, of, just sort of the gratitude and, you know, it's such a common experience that someone might come out of a ceremony and just feel like everything is love and light. And then as, that 3D reality kind of comes back online, sort of swing the opposite direction. Um, and yeah, I'm a big fan of what you'd shared at the end there. Many debates recently with my partner about like, is looking at life, life in the way that it's presented, say in some of those Buddhist texts, that we're all living in a dream and that ultimately nothing matters because one day when we die, we're just going to wake up into the next dream.
Yeah.
Is that a way of emotionally and spiritually bypassing the 3D aspect of life? And how do we balance that truth that, yeah, this is a dream, with still having to get up and go to work and do the laundry and things and deal
Yeah.
with the difficult parts of being a human being?
It's a great question. And, I come back to something, it was on a podcast I did with my really good friend Lucas. And we were talking about kind of this. It's like, if life's a dream, like, why does it all matter? And, who cares? And we are kind of, exploring these not nihilistic, kind of solipsistic worldviews. And, he just mentioned something like, well, even if it's a dream, why not make it the best damn dream possible? Um, and there's truth to that. And so I think like a philosophy, so during that time and probably a little bit longer than that time, I think it was before I really started doing more breath work. And so I'd say more in this like psychedelic era, I was trying to transcend this world. I was trying to transcend my ego. I was trying to transcend this 3D because it felt too much like suffering. And I had this experience in breath work where I was back in this death bardo, and I didn't want to come home. I didn't want to come back down here. And, I got this message. It was like, you have to go back down. That's where the work is. And you signed up for this in a way. And I remember sitting there during that session crying, going, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And then I had another breathwork session, and it was at Kripalu, and it was a part of a GTT, not a training, but a weekend, and Stan and everybody was there. And that experience was, I started quote unquote dying again, going through this near death experience. And I remember crying, I didn't want to leave this earth. I have too much stuff to do. And so much stuff to experience. And so I had the counter that, like, before I was seeking transcendence, and now I'm finding spirituality here in this 3D world, and that the magic is unfolding in front of us all the time, even though it is hard, and to not like do any sort of spiritual bypassing and say everything's perfect. Like, this is the work, though, to like be able to come down here and experience all these ranges of emotions, and really kind of be in the body. And it's like, who is that, Chardin, like that cliche quote of like, we're spiritual beings having human experiences. And like, I really do believe in that now. Like, so even though this might be a dream, you might wake up, what impact are you having in this dream? How are you influencing the dream? And how are you going to continue to show up? And so, even it might be worthless and nothing at the end for your own maybe personal journey, how is what your actions and your life going to have ripple effects into the dream and impact it? And so I think I get more curious around being rooted here, and showing up to do some of that work, even though it fucking sucks and it's hard. And some days I hate it and I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I want to go like live out in the woods and grow a garden and snowboard all day. But it's but that's what we're here to do, right? But it's hard to face, the death, the suffering, the abuse, the mistreatment, like, watching everything that's going on in the world right now, right? It's so heavy to hold. And some days it feels like, why do anything? Like, the world is just fucking crumbling. But I think it also gives us like more power to have those ripple effects in this dream, if it is a dream.
Yeah, there is some power in that, right? Like choosing to continue to see some good and some beauty and take enjoyment or receive those good moments, things that are super mundane, like
Yeah,
petting my cat
yeah.
or, like doing something nice for somebody else, in the face of all that. I totally agree. And I'm just sort of chuckling internally that it sounds like you're sharing something that I hear a lot on this podcast, especially, which is so many of us go through that stage of sort of disengaging or like wanting to get out of the body and using whatever we're using, whether it's the breath or psychedelics, to propel ourselves away. And then over time, we start to find the value and the profundity in being more present during those experiences.
Hmm.
And that we can actually go farther and deeper when we're embodied and when we're present in those expanded states, um, but grounded and rooted and embodied, than we could just trying to like take so much that we blast away from ourselves and sort of
Hmm.
dissociate from who we are and the world around us.
Yeah, and I mean, just like, I think we take just waking up every day for granted, right? Like, waking up and eating and smelling things and seeing the beauty, right? And I think that's what psychedelics and these states have taught me. It's like, every day is not guaranteed. And there's beauty and magic in just being able to wake up. On the other hand, it also is really challenging, right?
Yeah.
Especially if, life is really tough. It's like, oh, this again. It's like, what is that, Groundhog's Day? It's just like this again, over and over and over again. And we have to hold that too, right? Like, we can't just ignore that. Like, that is important, that, yeah, life is really tough. But, you know, this is the only thing that we kind of know in a sense, right? And to wake up and be able to experience it as we're here, to me, that's a really magical thing, because it's not guaranteed, so how do you really just try to enjoy every moment, even though sometimes it sucks, which comes back to that Zen koan, Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. As Jack Cornfield said, before ecstasy, do the dishes and take out the trash. After ecstasy, do the dishes, take out the trash. And it's like, how do we find the joy in the simple things in life? And again, that's a practice. Like I'm saying this, but I have my days. I have my days I don't want to do shit, and I'm like,
Right.
ugh, this sucks. Like I don't want to do anything. Like, and I have my escapist days where I just like think about all the wonderful things that like I could be doing and I don't want to do. And so it's a practice and it's a reminder that I have to tell myself every day. And so I think being able to talk about it like this helps me to actually remember like some of these truths that I believe in. Um,
Yeah. How do you teach that to folks that are new? I would imagine that you have lots of people coming into your vital facilitator training that are in a situation that we've seen time and time again, which is they've had this big peak experience. Something in that peak experience said, "This is what I want to do," or the medicine told them that they need to be serving the medicine, and now they've signed up for this program. And in a sense, you're kind of saying, "Hey, that's great, and we acknowledge that, but we also need to pump the brakes and take the time to do the practice." So like what's that like in within your program and how do you kind of get that message across?
Yeah, so a big focus of the program is also really focused on harm reduction and integration, and cultivating our own inner work and awareness. And so, I think being able to engage in really nuanced conversations in our study groups, we're presented with topics and then we break off into the study groups to get really nuanced with these conversations, and also not shy away from the quote unquote bad or negative aspects here, right? Like being really honest about the extreme of the positive and the extreme of the negatives and everything in between. And ironically, from the past like few cohorts that we've taught, we're on cohort 4 right now. It's really interesting about like maybe the 6 month mark and then sometimes by the year mark. There's a lot of people that came in with the expectation of I want to be a facilitator, and then towards the end they go, actually I don't know if this work is for me. I actually kind of want to focus on the integration side of things, or I really want to focus on like a business idea. And so we do take that approach within Vital, that we're not saying we're like, a facilitator training program. We're more focused on like this integration and harm reduction aspect and helping people to really kind of understand where they want to be in the field. And so in some way, Vital is this journey of self-discovery. You might come in with this expectation of wanting to be a facilitator. And, we do talk about facilitation skills and all that stuff. But I think it's really about developing your own self-awareness and understanding the nuances of this topic and field. And I've always been really surprised about like how people come in and they go, in the intake interview, it's like I'm going to be a facilitator, I'm going to do this, and then by the end they go, this is really intense work. I think I want to hang out on this side. Or I want to show up this way, which is important, right? I think like we need to develop that kind of self-awareness around what we are wanting to bring to the world and be honest about like, do I have the capacity to show up in this way? And some people, they just know themselves, they don't want to do that, right? And I think that's really, really important. This work can be really intense. This work can be really, nourishing in a lot of ways, right? Like it's so nourishing being able to like, host these experiences for folks. But on the other end, like, as my clinical supervisor once said, and this was in regards to therapy, but it totally relates to this work, I think even times 10 or 100, you're lending your heart out to somebody for an hour. You're lending your heart out to them for 4, 5 hours, for a whole
Right.
week, and as much empathy as and compassion we have for folks, there is, it takes an emotional drain on us sometimes, and we have to be honest of like, how much can I actually do this? Like I've hosted, I think, close to 15 retreats in the past two years. And this year we're not hosting too many retreats. I'm like, I need a break. Like that was a lot of traveling. That was a lot of like space holding to do. And and then kind of the decompression afterwards, like at least like having a few days just decompress after that, right? And so, yeah, just kind of being honest on like how we want to show up. So, I think I had a lot of mentors and teachers in my life that helped me pump the brakes and helped me to develop a little bit more of that self-awareness and get really kind of like honest with myself. And I'm so thankful that I had some of those mentors and teachers, even though it's like not the message I necessarily wanted to hear. Looking back, I'm like, I'm really thankful there was somebody in my life that said, you should probably slow down, and like maybe reconsider some stuff. And, I think it's helped me just to be a little bit more thoughtful on, yeah, where I want to be showing up and how I want to be showing up.
I can personally relate completely to what you just said. I mean, I have gone through that process myself of, oh yeah, I'm gonna facilitate and being really excited for it, and then saying, well, actually, I don't know if that's the best idea, but how can I support people in other ways, whether that's
Mhm.
through integration coaching or breathwork facilitation? And I've even had those moments. I mean, I had one a couple months ago in the midst of, one of the training modules for, for the Groff transpersonal training of being like, this is what you're signing up for. Like,
Mm.
really? Like, I do breath work with people all the time, and
Yeah.
I'm very, very comfortable at a certain depth of holding that space. And there's something about holotropic breath work, like, that's quite a lot deeper. And,
Hmm.
the container is quite a lot bigger. And just sitting there kind of saying, I don't know, like, I feel really comfortable in that more shallow side of the pool. Like, why do
Yeah.
you keep swimming towards this deeper end? You're going into this really, really conscious that this is what you're going to, be signing up for.
Yeah, and people like, I don't know if you get this question, but people are like, oh, like what's a breathwork training that I can get trained in like, really quickly? And I know GTT and like some of these other programs, like it's a minimum of at least 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was studying with my teachers for at least 4 years before even thinking about like hosting a workshop. And when I did, it was with like a small group of folks. And I think it's just, yeah, really important to be honest about like, how this work impacts us and how we want to show up there. There's times where I'm like, okay, I could take a break for a bit, right? And like, also think about like how well resourced you are. Like when I was working in residential, I was holding so much space for people that I had to pull away from hosting a breathwork workshop because it was like I'm holding way too much stuff in this other job that I can't hold anymore. And having people open up and have these really big cathartic experiences because when I go back, I'm gonna have to be holding even more extreme
Right.
experiences with other people and yeah, just being honest like where you're at times. I think that's really important. It's okay to take a step back if you need to, right? I think sometimes like we feel so committed to certain work and we feel like we constantly need to show up, but it's okay to take a step back and take care of yourself in other ways.
Yeah, that's the only way that we can continue to support other people,
Hmm.
right? And I see it a lot is, it's so easy to neglect your own self-care and your own nourishment when you're giving so much to other people,
Yeah.
and it's
Mm.
it's almost like you could really create a little niche out of like just taking care of other facilitators and,
Right.
get
Facilitator burnout's a real thing,
right. It
right? And
totally is.
I don't know how many people are like openly talking about it. Like it'd be really interesting to like, I mean, I don't know how many people are actually working full time in Oregon or how many people are going to be actually working full time in Colorado. But like, I wonder for those people that are working really full time, how are they taking care of themselves and also what is a burnout rate there? Because when I was also doing ketamine work, like I would do like a few sessions a week and I was like, that's good. But I was also managing a bunch of other things, right? I'm like, running Psychedelics Today and Vital during that time, and I have a lot more on my mind. I could only tolerate maybe doing like 2-3 sessions a week. And for some, they're doing session after session after session for weeks on end full time. But again, like I had to be really honest and be like, I have all this other stuff going on in my life. this is all I have the capacity for. Even though like that work really kind of fuels me and ignites me, I also have this other stuff that's going on. And yeah.
Yeah, it's a different sort of balancing and discernment, right? To sort of come full circle to what we started with of I had a similar experience, like going from working in an office environment or then working from home in that sort of corporate environment 40 to 50 hours a week to going to 20 hours a week in residential treatment and thinking, I hit the jackpot. Like, I'm
Yeah.
working half as much. This is going to be so easy, not understanding like the psychological and emotional toll that that kind of environment and that kind of space holding was going to take on me. And they would take me more than 3 days a week if I let them, and I'm like,
Yep.
no, no, this is fine. This is all I can handle with everything else in my life that I have going on.
Well,
And
vicarious trauma is a very real thing, right? And
right.
like I don't the stuff that I experienced in residential, like that's a lot of stuff to hold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I'm at the point now where I can feel grateful and for the experience and for having something that allowed me to step away from that corporate world and focus more on the work that is lighting me up and continues to light me up. But exactly what you just said of like, oh, wow, this is really taking a toll on me. And is this the best environment for me to be in to continue to pour into the cups that I've am really excited about? It's like that trauma well is kind of endless,
Hmm.
especially
Yeah.
when we're talking about like commercialized mental health. And God bless the people that decide to make that their career and like their forever place. It's just not me. Like, I would much rather be supporting the people that are on that spiritual emergent side rather than the ones that are, having the emergency. And some of that is my own, uh, reflection on like, hey, how sustainable is this for my own
Hmm.
mental health and sanity?
Yeah. And God bless all those folks that show up and
Yeah.
do that full time, like doctors, nurses, those in the psych units, stuff like that. Like, but again, I think it's about like your own self-awareness. Like there's people that like really thrive in that type of environment,
Yeah.
and really enjoy that and can like tolerate it. Where like, yeah, like I always said, like when I do get my license, I only want to practice like part-time. And that's also just part of like who I am. Like I feel like I need multiple different interests because there's like, just that complexity of self where I tend to get bored really easily at times. And so it's like, I like to have that variety, than just focusing so much on one thing. And I had teachers and stuff like that, throughout like my life say like, yeah, like I could see you getting your license, but probably not using it. I could see you more as an educator, and that's kind of the role I've been filling. Ironically, even though they were telling me that, I'm like, no, 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 that's never going to happen. And ironically, I've been kind of landing here more on the education side of things. Um,
Well, it's amazing to watch that from the sidelines and see, how that's grown and developed. And I'm really, really happy for you and the
Thank
growth
you.
that you've experienced.
And you too. Yeah, coming from the 15-minute one question segments to we're almost at an hour and a half here, and it's been awesome. And
That's right.
yeah,
So, as a way to kind of bring things to a close, and I feel like we could keep talking for a while, which is to me the mark of a good podcast. But I
yeah.
want to also be respectful of your time. Um, the name of the show is The Vital Point, which comes from a Dzogchen Buddhist teaching about the three statements that strike the vital point. My vital point is usually, no matter the methods that you're using, the important thing is to actually practice it.
Mm.
I'm curious if there's something in your work or just in your life that's alive today, or maybe that came up in this conversation that you would like to share as your vital point.
Hmm. I know it's such a big question. I guess I just want to come back to the importance of, grounding and integration. We can really explore these vast territories, go far, but, how do we also come back to the here and now, while we're here and really appreciate and soak it up? so that you can create a ripple in this dream that we're all living in, and hopefully for the better, and how do we also just really be there for folks too, right? How do we bring more compassion into the world? Um, because yeah, there's a lot of craziness happening right now. And how do we come back and find our center in the midst of all this chaos? And so, I think being rooted and being grounded, I think a teacher of mine said, there's a prophecy during this that has kind of predicted a time like this. And this is not the time to be wheat floating in the air. This is a time to be the rock that's grounded and rooted and stable. And so that feels, I think, more alive than ever right now. It's like, how do we really ground and be stable? And ironically, maybe I'll use like some astrology here. It's like, we just entered into this like Neptune Aries thing for those that are into astrology. But, this thinking about the dream world, Neptune, right? And how like vast that is. And then using the energy of Aries, Mars, god of war, for action. So how do we take what's in that dream world, root it down, be grounded, and turn that into action? Because we're gonna, I think, need to see a lot of that happening right now, with everything that's kind of like unfolding. So stay rooted, stay grounded, take your dreams, turn them into tangible things, and share it with the world, because the world needs you.
Thank you. Well said. Uh, Kyle, it's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you coming back on the podcast and for sharing your wisdom and experience. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, it's been a really fun conversation, and I agree. Like, this is a good conversation. I feel like we could keep going. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you inviting me back on here and having this.
Is Psychedelics Today the best place for people to go to connect with you and your work?
Yep, psychedelicstoday.com, Psychedelics Today on all the social platforms. If you want to follow me personally, Setting Sun Wellness. Haven't been posting too much just because I've been in the weeds with so much stuff. But yeah, if you want to reach out over there, that's my personal account, Setting Sun Wellness on Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks,
Yeah,
Kyle.
awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
What a great interview. Thanks so much to Kyle for his time and a great conversation. Make sure you go to psychedelicstoday.com to find out about Vital and the other workshops, classes, and courses that are available, as well as his amazing podcast. If you are enjoying this podcast, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment and follow, leave a review. It's a simple, cost-free way to help more people discover this show and support this project. Also, make sure that you go to bluemagicalchemy.com, sign up for the newsletter that comes out a couple times a month, and be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights delivered straight to you. It's a fantastic way to stay connected. When you sign up, I'll send you a free guide to using Breathwork for integration as a way to show my gratitude for your support. If you're looking for more support, come join us on School at www.school.com/Blue Magic Alchemy. That is the home of Blue Magic Alchemy and the place where our community is thriving with recorded and live breathwork and meditation, workshops, and other integrative practices, as well as a community message board so that you can connect with other alchemists doing the work and help each other explore and integrate. Remember, it's not about the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself and practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I'm honored to accompany you on yours. Please don't hesitate to reach out and connect, to share your journey, the successes and challenges alike. I'm just an email, DM, or review away. Let's journey, grow, and transform together. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to Kyle for his time. Until the next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.